Well, good day, everyone. Here we are in the brave new world of the coronavirus, and unlike its namesake, the Toyota Corona, this virus moves very quickly in terms of its implications and ramifications across our culture and our nation. And as you know by now, we've taken the step, as directed by the government really, to cease having our gatherings, our Sunday worship services and other ministries as well. And this is, it's a difficult decision to make. And I realise that for some of you, you may think that it's a little bit too drastic for our situation. And I just want to say a couple of things with respect to that. One is that it's a dynamic situation, and we will respond week by week. There are some people that have given us some ideas or some thoughts about how we might possibly meet, and so we will take those things on board, and we'll consider whether that's a possibility in the weeks to come, particularly if this is going to be a protracted period of time, which it looks like it might be, at least a couple of months. But the other thing I want to say, and I really want to encourage you with this, is that even though we can't meet on a Sunday, we still are the church. And I'm actually really quite excited about the possibilities of us as a church developing new patterns of church life and connectedness and witness and mission in our community in this time, which gives us the opportunity to do that outside of the structure of our other ministries, and in particular our worship services. So there's a sense in which I think there's some really good things that could come out of this. I'm really concerned that we as a church stay connected, and really keen on that and promoting that and doing all that we can and to do that. And so one of the things that Karen and I are doing is that we've been intentional, more intentional perhaps, about having people around at our place. And on a Sunday, we've got to remember that for some of our folks, the only opportunity they have for social interaction is actually on a Sunday morning. So if we can just be aware of that as a church family and reach out to one another, that'd be really good. And just in small groups, I'm not going to prescribe how big those groups should be or shouldn't be, but I just want to encourage you to do that, but also be aware of the recommendations around social distancing. I hate that term, but it's just something that we need to do. We have probably taken a conservative stance, and I would rather that there be margins around conservative decisions about our gatherings and our meetings than we just go ahead and do things and continue as per normal and possibly be negligent. It's a remote possibility, but we would rather be conservative. But I want to read to you something that my son-in-law, Troy, sent through. And this is a quote from Martin Luther. Now, Martin Luther was, as you know, one of the great reformers, possibly the greatest reformer. He was a pastor, a writer, and he lived during the Black Plague. And this is what he wrote. And I think this is really godly wisdom for us. He said, "I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed, in order not to become contaminated, and thus perchance inflict and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he will surely find me, and I have done what he has expected of me, and so I am not responsible for either my own death or the death of others. If my neighbour needs me, however," this is really important, "I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely as stated above. See, this is such a God-fearing faith, because it is neither brash nor foolhardy, and does not tempt God." And that's Martin Luther's own words in the midst of the Black Plague. Now, we can argue that the Black Plague is worse than the coronavirus, or was worse than coronavirus potentially, and the reason many of these diseases were is because they were communicated very quickly. They were transferred from one person to another because social distancing was not even a consideration in many of these cases, and infection rates were extremely high. So all of that to say, yes, we've taken a conservative approach for the moment, and we'll keep monitoring that and our response to government recommendations, and also Baptist Union of Queensland recommendations, and we'll keep you in the loop with regard to that. We're going to continue with our message series on the atonement in a moment, and I'm just going to share with you. It'll be a bit briefer than normal, and you should be accessing this via a link as I email you after the message has been recorded. I'll email you with a link to YouTube, and along with that email will be an attachment with this week's bulletin, and so that's there for your perusal. Please feel free to contact me if you have any concerns, if you have any needs, practical needs. If you need someone to, just go down to the grocery store and get you some things, or if you need help around the home, whatever it might be, if you're in isolation, please reach out to me, and that's what I'm here for. I'm continuing to operate as per normal. This is coming out of my office. What you're seeing is a very clean, neat part of my office. We don't want to turn the camera around so you can see the rest of the mess. But so I'm continuing to be on deck and on board. We have taken the step to close the op shop down for approximately 4 weeks till after the school holidays. This is in response to the concern that we have about our op shop volunteers handling money and also second-hand clothes and goods that come in that we don't know where they've been, and so again it's a precautionary measure. At the moment though, the resource centre, which is, I'm sitting behind the resource centre desk, and also the Centrelink office are still open for business, as it were. Okay, well, let's get into the Word of God, and before we do that, let me just pray. Our Father and our God, we want to thank you that you have promised to never leave nor forsake us, that you are the solid rock and foundation in all of the circumstances of our life. And we thank you that you're not surprised by the coronavirus, that you are aware, you're aware of the pain that people are experiencing, and you sorrow over the death of people as well. We know that you're a compassionate God and a loving Father, and so we know that in all things you are the bedrock on which we stand. You see the beginning and the end. You know the end of this experience, and we thank you that in all things you are sovereign. In all things you are God. And I pray that you would help us to respond well through this, that you would help us to respond with faith and obedience, with a great sense of hope and expectation, that you would help our responses to be measured according to the information that we have, and yet you would also help us to be compassionate and loving to those around us and to reach out in your name. We want to do that as a church. We want to continue to be your church in this community where you've placed us. And so we want to thank you for the opportunity to look at your word now for a few moments and ask that you would speak to each one of us. In Jesus' name, amen. We've been looking at the atonement and redemption in our Sunday services, and so this afternoon, we're going to continue with that. And you may remember that at the beginning of this series, I said that the atonement and the concept of redemption is multifaceted, and in many ways, it's like looking at a multifaceted jewel. And you pick up the jewel and you turn it and you see one facet or two facets, and it's beautiful, it's breathtaking. But then you turn it and you see other facets that don't diminish in any way the beauty of the jewel, but they just enhance it and they augment it. And the atonement and redemption are like that. And this afternoon, I want to introduce another aspect, another concept for you to think about with respect to the atonement and redemption, and that is that Jesus is our ransom. Now, the background to this concept, or one of the background scriptures, is in Mark chapter 10. And in Mark chapter 10, we read that Jesus predicts his death, and he does that as he's journeying with his disciples. And Mark says, again Jesus spoke to his disciples about his hour, about the crucifixion. I get the sense sometimes that Jesus was really frustrated with his disciples. They were dull-witted, because Mark says, and again. And in this story, as Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem with the disciples, again he explains to them that he is going to be betrayed to the chief priests and the teachers of the law, that they're going to condemn him to death, and that he'll be handed over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him, and 3 days later he will rise. Now, I don't know whether you can feel the weight of this, but Jesus has just explained to him that he is about to enter into his hour, or his passion, if you like. And immediately afterwards, the disciples start arguing about who's going to have the greatest place in the kingdom. Jesus has just spoken to them about his death, and they're already arguing about the inheritance. And it's in this context, towards halfway through the chapter, that Jesus says in verse 42, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be the first must be the slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And there you have it, this concept of the ransom. Now, the Redeemer provides a ransom to make the payment, to provide the payment to release those who are captive. This word ransom is an interesting word. The noun is the Greek word lutron. Now, some of you have sat in my office and you've looked across to the shelf there, and you've seen a little book there called Elements of New Testament Greek. And strangely enough, none of you have ever asked to borrow that book. But if you did, and you went to the vocabulary section of Wenham's Elements of New Testament Greek, the first word that you would come to would be the verb luo. And the verb luo means to set free or to loose, to take off the chains that bind someone, as it were. Now, we're actually quite familiar with this concept of the ransom, and we've all seen the movies, haven't we, when a kidnapper will take someone hostage, an adult or a child, whatever it might be, whoever it might be, and they will demand a ransom price for the release of that person. And that's actually how the word ransom was used in antiquity. It was used as the price to release someone from captivity. Sometimes it was used as the price paid to set a slave free. It was even used in times of war to release a price that was set to release prisoners of war. And so this is the concept, that there is a price paid for the release of those who are bound and those who are captive. So it's very closely linked with the concept of redemption. And we think about the Old Testament, don't we, in Exodus, where God set his people free and his people were bound and they were captive and God set them free. And so this whole concept of redemption, setting people free, is contingent upon, in terms of the atonement, it's contingent upon a ransom price that is paid. Now, Jesus is our ransom. This whole concept of the ransom raises some interesting questions. One of the questions is this: who actually sets the price tag for the ransom? There's not a board of trade that meets together and says, well, this person is actually worth this amount and this person is worth that amount. The person who sets the price for the ransom is the person who kidnaps. It's the person who has nefarious intentions. It's the person who is seeking to extort and extract money for the release of the hostage. The person who sets the price for the ransom is actually the criminal. And that's an interesting concept to think about with respect to the atonement. Because another question that comes about is, to whom is the ransom paid? Now, you need to hang in here for a moment or two. There's a very destructive view on the atonement, and it's an errant view. And it goes like this, that Satan has bound people in his grasp, in his chains, as it were. And Jesus actually pays the ransom price to Satan. And we are then set free. As I said, it's an errant view. But just hold that thought for a moment and let me introduce another concept to your thinking. In the New Testament, there is a very, very strong motive that comes under the banner of Christus Victor. And what that means is, in the atonement of Christ and through the work of the Christ, Christ has gained a cosmic victory over the power of evil. That he has defeated the work of Satan, that he has released his people from captivity, and there is this overarching theme, which is in fact right from the beginning of Jesus' ministry right to the end, where he is the victor. It's a very, very strong element of the atonement teaching. Now, I don't want to minimize that in any way, but what we need to understand is this, that when Jesus pays the ransom price, he does not pay it to Satan. The ransom price is paid to the one to whom it's owed. And last week we talked about God as one of the roles of God in the atonement is that God is actually the offended party. He's the injured party. And the ransom price is paid to God and not to Satan. Because if the ransom price was paid to Satan, that would make him the victor, not Jesus. It's very important that we understand that. So, Christ is our ransom, and the price is paid to the Father. Jesus willingly is our ransom and our sacrifice and our substitute. Jesus offers himself to the Father. He pays the price, and he does that in our place. One of the ways to think about the atonement is that it's a work of art. And I've visited art galleries, as you have. I'm not a big fan, to be honest. But and it's mainly because I don't understand art. I certainly don't understand art that needs interpreting. I can appreciate art that's very clear. But imagine that you're in an art gallery and you're standing in front of a painting and someone's beside you and you look at this painting and you're thinking, what does it mean? How am I supposed to interpret this painting? What is the best way? What is the best way to understand that? Best way is to actually ask the artist, what did you mean when you painted this? Now, some artists will say, well, I meant whatever you want it to mean. I just paint the picture and you interpret it. I'm an existentialist. You do with it what you want. Well, Jesus was not an existentialist. And if we really want to find out what the atonement means with respect to ransom, then we need to hear the words of Jesus when he said in John chapter 10, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. And there you have Jesus saying two things. One is, I received a command from my Father, and yet I willingly accepted that command. I willingly bowed my knee to that command. I was not forced. I was not coerced. I willingly laid down my life for my sheep, for my people. And I do that as a ransom. And the price is paid to the Father. And my people are set free from their bondage. Wow, that's a wonderful thing. Just before Christmas, I was speaking to one of my sisters, and she was reflecting on how when we were kids growing up in the church, very often the message was very harsh and strident, and you'd come away thinking that, or feeling certainly a sense of condemnation, and wondering why, after having heard what you'd heard, and not just the content but the tone in which it was expressed, why would God even bother with a worm like me? And many people thought that. Many people kind of received that message from church, a message of condemnation and a message of worthlessness. How beautiful it is to reflect on the ransom of Christ, because intrinsically in the message of the ransom is this, that we are not worthless, that we are treasured, that we are precious to our Father, that He would offer such a price as a ransom to set us free from the bondage of our sin, to set us free from the penalty of our sin, to set us free from the clutch of the enemy. How precious we are to Him. And I think in these really difficult times, or certainly uncertain times, there's something we can stand on there to remember how loved we are, how treasured we are, and how precious we are to our Father. And I want you to reflect on that this week, and may that give you strength. May that give you resilience in your faith. May it give you a heart of love and compassion for those around you. Bless you heaps, and we'll be emailing out to you the link so that you can access this on YouTube and watch it. It's a weekend message. You can watch it whenever you want to. You don't have to listen to it at 9:30 on Sunday, whenever you choose to. And I trust this helps you this week. And we'll continue the series through next week. And we'll see you soon. Bless you.